When Westminster began in 1976, there were 73 students, grades 7 through 12. The school rented several classrooms at Missouri Baptist College at that time and opened the school. There was not much, in terms of facilities, courses, laboratories, stages, theaters, extracurriculars, none of it. The parents back in those days made that kind of a commitment. It was to a Christian school. This is the kind of foundation they wanted for their kids. So they were willing to sacrifice all of the flashy kind of things that a high school experience could offer and sent their kids to Westminster. I'm a product of Christian education. I grew up in New Jersey and went to a school called Eastern Christian. I was very interested in sports, especially basketball. And my high school coach, he took a lot of time to mentor me and spend time with me. That was a transformative experience for me. I wanted to be him. I wanted to coach, I wanted to teach, and I wanted to have an impact on the lives of kids, students, young people, the way he influenced my life. And that never wavered. Just before the school on Ladue Road, there was a small elementary school in the Kirkwood School District on Manchester Road in Des Peres. Today it's a Walgreens, but at that time it was Westminster Christian Academy. It was small, and Westminster kind of outgrew it. And then someone told one of the board meetings about the sale of the old West Ladue Middle School on Ladue Road. And one of the really big steps of faith at that time was actually pursuing that campus. Westminster didn't have any money, so they did two things. They started what was known as the Westminster Shares Program. And every family was required to put up a loan of $2,000 without interest that would be repaid when the last child left the school. And that generated about half of the money needed to purchase the Ladue Road campus and then borrow the rest. And also, in order to get that loan, board members actually put up their homes as collateral. And that was how the Ladue Road campus was purchased. That was a big step of faith back in 1982. And God blessed it. I first found out about Westminster in 1984. At that time, I was the head of school at Fort Lauderdale Christian. And Rich Van Gilst, he was a teacher and a coach at Fort Lauderdale Christian. But for the 83-84 school year, he moved with his family here to St. Louis. He called me up and said that the head of school had resigned and they were doing a search for a new head of school, and would it be okay if he gave the search committee my name? And I said, sure. I didn't know anything about St. Louis or Westminster, and they just asked me to come by myself, spend a couple of days and visit. And by the time I left, I really felt like this was a school that was really serious about being a Christian school in all that means, but also a high quality. I was excited about what I saw, and I told my family, my wife, that if God opened the door there, I would really like to be a part of a school like Westminster, and that's what happened. One of the things that impressed me about Westminster from the very earliest times is the people who God had led to teach and lead at the school. Scott Holley, Andy Shaw, David Haas, Betsy Tyval, Sarah and Jim Drexler, Larry Birchler, Florence Lewis, Sherry Blau. Every one of them had this incredibly deep commitment to the school, working to make it happen and see it grow. And that was the culture. I mean, we were working together. After we expanded the Ladue Road campus, we thought that we could grow into 800 students over time. And well, it took 2 years and we were at 800 and completely full. And we started the conversation about, well, what do we do? Close off enrollment, have waiting lists, But really it came down to, finally the decision had to be made. Are we going to grow, or are we just going to stay here on Ladue Road? And that all came down to mission. We believed that Westminster should be available to every Christian family in St. Louis that desired a Christian secondary education for their kids. So the only thing for us to do would be in some way to grow. But just about the early 2000s, Dan Stegman, who was a former Westminster father and a developer, came forward with the news that the special school district decided to sell the underutilized West County Technical School in Town and Country. The first time I walked into it to take a tour, it had a room with 2 airplanes and a helicopter in it. That's the kind of building it was. There's the carpentry and a plumbing and, all these big, it took an unbelievable amount of imagination to, see how that building could become Westminster Christian Academy. But we purchased it and then started having to deal with, how are we going to develop it? What is it going to be? How do we turn this behemoth of a building on 40 acres into the new Westminster Christian Academy? We had a campaign put in place. We scrapped that because of the Great Recession. We rented out as much of the facility as we could, and that kind of helped us pay at least the interest payments along the way, and kept on praying and thinking about the future. We had been talking to the superintendent of the Ladue School District along the way during this whole study about any possible interest they might have in purchasing the Ladue Road campus. And out of the blue, they had a board meeting and they decided they were going to build a new early childhood center. Then they decided maybe we should purchase that Westminster property. They voted yes and did their own appraisal and came to us with an offer to purchase our Ladue Road campus for $18 million. Our expectation was if we could get $10 million for that property, we should go for it. We got $18 million. So now we basically burned the boats behind us because we have to move and we have this property in Town and Country that has to be developed. And we don't really have a plan yet for that. In the meantime, there was a property immediately connected to the Town and Country campus called Centrete that was owned by Central Presbyterian Church for many, many years, creating this perfect 70-acre piece of land that would support our school. I always thought it would be great if they just gave it to us. And at that time, I had a diagram in my office, and we had a meeting with a donor to ask for a gift of $100,000, which is a hefty gift. So we made our presentation. It was a father and 2 sons, and he looked at that aerial view, and he said to me, "Why is it that you're just going to build the campus on 40 acres here?" Kind of thinking out loud, what if we purchased Centrete from Central Presbyterian Church and then gifted it to Westminster? Yeah, after I, took a deep breath, I said, that would be wonderful. And a $7.2 million gift was given to us. Purchased Centrete. So now we had 70 acres in the demographic center of the metropolitan area of St. Louis, and we start all over again. Spent a year designing this campus where we're sitting right now. Broke ground. 2 years later, in August of 2011, we moved in. The generosity and the vision and faith of the founding families, putting their homes as collateral, or the shares program, and then major gifts along the way. There's no doubt that God has used the generosity of his people to build and grow Westminster into what it is today. And there is no doubt that he has blessed families and individuals with abundance, and those families and people have been generous in sharing these large, major gifts that have enabled Westminster to continue to move forward, to flourish, to expand, and to provide the kinds of opportunities we do on this campus. In order for Christian schools to flourish in the future, it's going to take that kind of continued support. And if there are ways that we can ensure the future through endowment, for example, keep our doors open to all families and those that don't have the means to afford tuition. I look at my grandkids and I ask myself the question, what about their kids? Is it going to be accessible for them? I think one of the remarkable truths about Westminster is in the fact that our mission and vision and core values have not changed. You talk about mission drift. It starts with making a decision that kind of is a small step away from who you are, and then 10, 15 years later, you see what the impact of that decision is. Westminster has avoided that. For myself, I've spent my life doing something that I love and that I think God has provided as an opportunity for me to serve Him. That's why I'm still here. I just like being around the teachers and kids, being a part of their lives and see them on the stage or on the basketball court. It's that significant sense of being called and being blessed by the opportunity. There were times where I had to someone confronted me at the beginning of the project saying, "Are you all in on this, Jim?" And I came to the conclusion that I had a bigger fear for not going for it than I did for actually going for it, even if we failed. So I think my faith has grown because there's been a lot of those kinds of situations where it looked like, really, God? And just seeing Him answer prayer, bring people together, make impossible things possible. It strengthened my faith that nothing is impossible with God.